All right. I think we're live, everyone. Welcome back to Occupy Fantasies DFS and betting breakdown for UFC Fight Night Rio, taking place today at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah, guys, coming off a week where we had terrible technical difficulties for the entire show. I have a new microphone right now. I'm not sure how great it sounds. If you guys could just let me know in the comments or the chat how things are sounding, I'm hoping they vastly improved. The bigger issue was actually the internet. I'm now plugged into an Ethernet cable, so things shouldn't be as choppy as they were last time. Kind of counting on that. So, yeah, if you guys could just kind of comment here, let me know how things are sounding. Really appreciate you tuning in. But we got a fun card here. Definitely a few fights we need to keep an eye on. There's two that could very well be canceled even after lock. We'll definitely talk you through that and how to handle that situation. As always, I'm going to be referencing the Occupy model, which is going to kind of give us upside scores for all of our fighters here. We'll talk through some ownership projections as well, talk about how we're going to be building on both DraftKings and FanDuel for this slate this evening. Then at the end of the show, I will give you guys my best bets, looking to bounce back, only 2 and 3 last week. Sitting around 500 since we started the show. Not great, honestly. Obviously want to be giving you guys better than that. So while we're kind of treading water, we want to do even better. Let's make some money this evening on this fight card in one of the homes of fighting in the world in Brazil. But without further ado, let's get into the fight-by-fight breakdown. Checking out the chat here. It says we sound good. Appreciate you, Poe. DJ Stoner, great name. Cool logo with the Dune there as well. Shouts out to John K becoming a member. Appreciate you guys tuning in here. So, as always, we do have a DFS focus here at Occupy, right? That's kind of the way the site is presented. Obviously, we're going to be giving you guys betting info, good things like that as well. But really interesting main event here and a fun one between Charles Oliveira, former champion of the 155-pound division, and Mateusz Gamrot, who's taking this fight on just 3 weeks' notice. Charles actually priced as the underdog here on both sites and, on the money line as well. Floating around a minus 105 to minus 110 favorite, depending on your book. There's some books taking juice on both sides of this money line. But yeah, Charles obviously coming off the brutal KO loss to Ilia Topuria, which came in June. So usually when a guy is coming back from a brutal KO like that, we got to put up some red flags, right? I guess the one good thing for him here is Gamrot isn't necessarily known as a power puncher. He does have wins by KO, but it's usually like a timely elbow. I don't know, just a little bit flashier stuff than just your typical 1-2s down the middle that Charles does seem to struggle with. We saw him put on his butt against the likes of Michael Chandler. Going back to the Justin Gaethje fight, Dustin Poirier, they all had success against him early, but what Charles does very famously, falls to his back. No one wants to jump into that guard, so he has time to recover. The guys who've had success against him are willing to engage with him there. So obviously, Ilia Topuria would have. Arman Sarukian, that fight was very much back and forth. Islam Makhachev, all really solid grapplers, and that is what he's going to be running into here against Mateusz Gamrot. Well, what I will say is all those guys that I'm listing who have had success aren't as good of or they're better strikers, honestly, than Mateusz Gamrot in terms of power, certainly. Looking at some of the statistics here for these two, they both land around 3.3 significant strikes per minute. Both absorb around 3 significant strikes per minute. Gamrot does average more than 5 takedowns per 15 minutes. So while I do think this is a coin flip fight, I could certainly see it going either way. I do like that Charles is going to be fighting in front of his home crowd. I don't mind the matchup for him. Gamrot, probably not favorable for him to be taking this on just 3 weeks' notice, just against such a talented and dangerous fighter. In Charles Oliveira, we're getting some value on both sides here. So looking at the stream graphics, we have Gamrot as the top OF index play on the entire slate. Just massive OF index score, 145. That's clearing everyone else by 30 points. But that's reflected in the ownership, right? So 43% owned for him compared to 42% for Charles Oliveira. What that is telling us is these guys are going to be in almost every single DFS lineup on DraftKings. I would want one of them in most lineups. I mean, logic would say the easiest way to get different is maybe to leave this fight out. But you have to think, if Charles is winning, it's probably via finish. If Gamrot's winning, it's probably securing a ton of takedowns in top time. So both of them are going to score really well here in a win. And in your low-risk contest, in your cash games, extremely small field, I do think this fight is stackable. Unlike last week, there is only one 5-round fight. So if you're looking to I don't know, build a low risk lineup this evening, I do think you could stack this main event. Personally, not always a strategy I'm interested in, especially on these smaller slates, knowing that it's very difficult to get different. But if you're playing cash games, getting different isn't necessarily what you're looking to do anyway. My strategy does kind of cater more towards large field tournaments, GPPs. And I do like the Charles slide slightly, but I will say Gamrot's going to score well regardless of whether he wins or loses, unless he's finished quickly. So I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place in this one, but it's reflected in the betting line, right? We're looking at a minus 110 on both sides here. If this fight takes place 10 times, I mean, we can see a different outcome every single time. I don't think there's a huge advantage for any fighter here. Charles is going to be the longer striker. And I will say this about Gamrot, even when he's winning fights, we see him put down. I mean, he faded late against Dan Hooker, was kind of picked apart on the feet there. We saw him, let me pull up the game logs here. But yeah, against Dariush, where he struggled, was knocked down there. I mean, this is a guy who has a good chin, but he does get dropped. And against Charles, that could be troublesome. So I do think either side here could look really good. And again, I know this isn't the most technical breakdown. It's just these are two similar fighters in a lot of ways. That kind of play into each other's strengths. So it is very tricky. I don't want to sit here and act like I'm super confident either side, excuse me, because no one really should be. And I mean, the betting market is kind of in that same place again, with this being pretty much lined exactly how to pick them. Shouts out to Power here, one of our NBA regulars. We got NBA right around the corner. We're actually talking about scheduling right now in the Discord, so really appreciate you being here. But yeah, I think in summary, you want a piece of this main event in most of your lineups. I slightly prefer the Charles side, but you're not getting a huge discount in terms of ownership. So Gamrot, according to the model, is the better DFS play. So say you're playing 10 lineups, I'd probably want Gamrot in 6, Oliveira in 4, maybe Gamrot in 7, Oliveira in 3. I do think Oliveira as a slight underdog is appealing here in front of his home crowd as far as a money line bet goes, but at the same time, not really confident in that. Wouldn't call it a best bet or anything like that. I do have a best bet on this fight, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for now, again, I think you want exposure to that main event. I think I slightly prefer Charles, but the model loves Gamrot here. And we actually have a quote from Derek Phillips' Daily Plug. And this kind of explains it, right? Gamrot is the highest ranked fighter in the Occupy model this week. We're also projecting him to be the highest owned option. This should come as no surprise, especially on DraftKings, with a level of wrestling and ground control that he has shown in recent performances, landing 22 takedowns across 45 minutes of fight time in his last 3 fights. Again, just scores tremendously for DFS. So unless Charles can finish him early, even in a loss, Gamrot would probably score well here. Again, I do think the finishing upside is more on the Oliveira side. But as far as like a floor projection, Gamrot definitely has that. And I can't compare him to a Marab. As far as fantasy scoring goes, he had 20 takedowns last week against Sandhagen. But Gamrot, kind of a similar fighter. He's going to chain those takedowns together. He can get them from all over the place. I mean, he really reaches for guys' legs, likes to do a little bit of ankle picking, good things like that. But yeah, just a 56% takedown defense for Charles Oliveira. That is by design because he does want to play in the guard. But let's go ahead and get into the next fight here. SC with a comment, 9K feels so heavy owned. Underdogs are hard to feel confident about. I'm with you, man. There are a few dogs I like. I actually do have one in this next fight, and I think I'm going to be on an island here. We got Montel Jackson taking on Davis and Figueiredo. So Jackson, really talented up-and-coming fighter on a nice win streak here, coming off a nice win over a tough out. I believe Daniel Marcos was undefeated at the time these two squared up. Montel Jackson, really powerful striker for a bantamweight. That great 1-2 we saw him put out to Mo Blackshear pretty much instantly in their fight. Ronnie Yaya, nice KO there. But what stands out to me is kind of the level of competition here. I mean, Marcos looked fine in that fight, but he was taking Jackson down at times, not necessarily a good thing. So in this matchup, I do think the line is a little bit too wide. Yeah, we're looking at the money line. I mean, going off of DK, minus 325 for Jackson right now. I think Figueiredo's being a little bit disrespected. Figgy coming off a performance where he was injured against Corey Sandhagen, who just challenged for the title. Won 5 rounds with Peter Yan, was kind of picked apart there. But we look at who he's fighting. I mean, Sandhagen, title challenger. Yan, former title holder. Vera, title challenger. Garbrandt, Font. These are guys who have been at the top of the division for years. And then we're back to what Figgy was, a flyweight. So The big reason to like Jackson here, if you do like Jackson, is that reach advantage, is that superior boxing. He has a 7-inch reach advantage here, 75 inches compared to 68 for Figueiredo. But Figueiredo does do a really good job kind of cutting angles and working his way into the pocket. I actually think Figueiredo is also the better submission grappler here by a pretty wide margin. Jackson does have decent wrestling ability, but we go back through his UFC career. Who has he struggled against? I mean, JP Buys, he dominated, knocked the kid down 100 times. JP Buys was not UFC level. He was able to take Jackson's back. His loss to Brett Johns, he was taken down repeatedly. I mean, even in some of these wins, like against the Daniel Marcos, we see him being taken down. So I think there is a world where Figgy could get his wrestling going here. But in some ways, this is an IQ test for a guy in Figueiredo who's kind of a marauder. Different style than a Jerry, but kind of that same kill or be killed. I mean, I'm just in there to go to war and hopefully I come out of the chaos. Not necessarily somebody you want to kind of lean on a very sound and technical game plan, especially when that game plan requires wrestling to get it done. But I do think he's interesting as an underdog. Am I confident in him? No, not necessarily. But I do think if you're looking for value, he's someone I do want to have exposure to. And again, I mean, Jackson is going to look really solid here. We see him as a 30% owned play, though. Let me pull up the model here on my other screen. I can't imagine Figgy's too popular. And when all else fails and you're having trouble picking these underdogs, sometimes you just go with talent, right? Even in bad matchups, we see the talent sometimes rise to the top. I think Figgy is a former title holder, albeit in a different division, is someone who should be higher owned than where he is right now. 17% on DK, 8% on FanDuel, and very cheap over there as well. I want exposure to him. And is it going to kill me? Could he get knocked out immediately? Certainly. If I'm playing multiple lineups, I do want exposure to Jackson. I think stylistically, Jackson is a really tough test, but I don't know that he's going to be able to keep this fight standing. I like that it's 3 rounds. Figgy has seemed to fade late in fights recently, but he's been in these 5-round fights. And Jackson, again, he struggled against grapplers. He's looked good, but against a much lower level of opponent. I hate that Figgy's coming back so soon off of that knee injury. I don't know how injured the knee was. I don't think he had surgery, so it's a bit of a red flag. Again, kind of similar to the main event with Charles coming back so soon, but I like him here. I don't mind mixing him in as an underdog. Is that a hot take? Probably. When I say he's the best bet, no. But if you're someone who bets value every single week, like you go through, you make your picks, that's one thing. You go through, you look for value. To me, Figgy pushing plus 300 is value. And does he get starched here? I can see it. But this is by far the toughest opponent that Jackson has faced. I do think Jackson, the most likely outcome is he probably KOs him with a 1-2. But if he doesn't, and this fight does go to the scorecards, I think it could be close. And we're going to see some Figgy top time here. Figgy also has power of his own. He also has submission upside. So I hate to toot the horn of such a heavy underdog so aggressively, but to me, Figueiredo definitely someone I'm interested in. Again, the most likely outcome is Jackson does find that 1-2 with his 7-inch reach advantage, find that quick KO. But if he doesn't, things could get really dicey here. Let's move right into the feature bout here. I will get back to chat, guys, and talk through some of this stuff. But we got Joel Alvarez moving up to 170 pounds, taking on Vicente Luque. Luque, I mean, you look at his age, he's not that old. But in fight years, I mean, he's ancient, right? This is a guy who's been in a ton of wars. He had brain bleed issues a few fights ago. Coming out against Kevin Holland really didn't look great. He had that win over Garimbo. I was super heavy on Luque in that spot, or just as a fade of Garimbo that I really rated. Luque looked terrible against Buckley. I mean, Buckley's good. He did beat RDA, but RDA, another fighter who's kind of on the way out. So he's been taking on good competition. It really hasn't looked like himself, though. We definitely have to have concerns about his durability and everything like that. And we get a guy moving up in weight in Joel Alvarez, but to me, he's actually moving into his proper weight class. So Joel Alvarez was always way too big, in my opinion, for 155 pounds, had a ton of trouble making that weight. And regardless, went on a really nice run. The one loss he had was to Arman Sarukian. On this little stretch here. But other than that, other than Ismagulov in his debut, has just been a marauder, just dominating, scoring really well in terms of fantasy. Alvarez fighting out of Spain, great submission grappler, works well off his back, has a lot of triangles. I mean, earlier in his career, he can use those to find sweeps as well. His striking, though, has come a really long way. Very powerful on the feet. And against someone like Luque, I do expect that could be trouble for the vet. again, the age gap here is only 2 years, but in terms of fight years, Alvarez, because he used to have to make 155 pounds, wasn't a guy we saw fighting very often, hasn't been in action since December of 2024. Taking that time off, though, to fill into this weight class. And if you saw him at weigh-ins this week, you saw him at face-offs, he belongs at 170 pounds, like I said. It is a big jump up, but Luque, I mean, I don't know. He doesn't really fill out his frame at this point in his career. So to me, kind of similar to the co-main, these are two guys whose careers are kind of headed in opposite directions. I just think the gap here in the money line, in the price, is more justified than it is in the Jackson Figueiredo fight. Again, because we've seen a really solid version of Alvarez. We see all these great skills that he has, and he's been taking on a pretty quality level of opponent compared to what we've been seeing from Jackson. And then we look at Luque, the brain bleeding, the durability issues. Alvarez definitely has KO upside here. He could find a submission as well. We did see Luque kind of run into that choke against Holland. Alvarez has an excellent front choke series. Both of these guys land a lot of volume on the feet. Alvarez, though, much better in terms of his defense. So Luque lands 5 significant strikes per minute, but he absorbs over that, 5.25, compared to Alvarez, who lands just 4.5, only absorbing 3.3. We're talking about takedown defense as well. Luque is 60% compared to Alvarez is 40. But if Luque tries to take Alvarez down, I think we could see a guillotine here. I think we could see him work for a triangle off his back. And Luque, who used to be known for his durability and his chin, is going to be willing to probably take the way out here if things aren't going his way. So I like the Alvarez side. I do think he's someone we want to pay up for. Pulling up some of the graphics here from the model, Alvarez behind Gamrot is one of the top OF index plays on the slate with a 114. Looks great there. Very popular as well, though. At 38% owned. So if you got some love for Luque, I do as well. I mean, you can maybe sprinkle in a little bit to your exposures, but I do think Alvarez is probably going to steamroll him here. This feels like a changing of the guard, in my opinion, in front of the Brazilian crowd. And on a lot of these local cards recently, like in Perth, all the Australians won. On Noche, all the Mexicans won. We have Brazil taking on a Spanish fighter here, but I don't know that they're looking to really build up Luque at this point in his career. It's interesting. There's so many Brazilian fighters in the UFC that don't have to try as hard to push these narratives. So while it was something we were looking into for those recent local cards, I wouldn't look into it as much as we're going to here. I do believe Alvarez also has some Brazilian in his lineage. Don't quote me on that. Definitely represents Spain. But yeah, I do think Alvarez gets it done. Luque just a little bit far past his prime. All right, let's keep it going here. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Once again, like the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. Hoping the audio quality and video quality is better today. Again, a bit of a work in progress. I know last week was a nightmare, so anything better than that should be an improvement, but hoping that improvement is great. Let's see here. We got a heavyweight bout. Pretty interesting matchup here between one Mario Pinto and Jonathan Deniz. The UFC heavyweight division is starving for talent. They're really trying to build some of these prospects as well as they can. I mean, Pinto, he's going to be the road dog here, right? Obviously, with Deniz being the Brazilian fighter. Looked good his last time out against Lane. Lane, not great, though, and he was taking a ton of damage in exchanges there against Austin Lane. But undefeated fighter, definitely has upside, probably the better grappler in this matchup as well. Not that I think this fight necessarily hits the mat. Then Jonathan Deniz last time out took on Alvin Hines. Hines never went down. Deniz definitely outclassed him, but Hines was on a lot of steroids. So maybe that durability was because of his doctor, not necessarily his chin, or because Deniz wasn't doing what he needed to find that finish. So take that with a grain of salt, that went to decision. But this is a volatile matchup, right, for a few reasons. First, heavyweights are always volatile. They're big, so they hit hard. They're not necessarily the most skilled, so they absorb a lot of damage. And Pinto, undefeated, as good as he's looked, hasn't really been tested against anyone on Deniz's level yet. So this is a tricky fight for that reason. I slightly prefer the Deniz side here, but it's not with much confidence at all. I like that he puts out more volume on the feet, 4.6 significant strikes per minute, only absorbing 3.7, and Pinto landing 3.6 across 2 fights, absorbing 5.3, so taking more damage than he should. Like I said, if he chooses to grapple here, he could look like the rightful favorite. Right now, standing as a slight underdog is Mario Pinto. But really, this is probably another fight you maybe want both sides of, but I know the guys who put Derek, who wrote up the plug, has this fight going the distance. I think there is a very good chance this fight does go the distance, but if there is a finish, I tend to think that we see it in favor of Deniz. I just think Pinto isn't very good defensively in terms of his striking compared to Deniz. At the same time, Pinto's going to come out shot out if it can and be super aggressive here. So anything can happen. This could be a car crash. I mean, both these guys, similar ownerships on both sites. Deniz, the line has flipped to a favorite, so he is priced as the underdog on DK at 7,900, which always makes him very appealing in terms of DFS. But again, another very, very volatile matchup, a fight I could see going either way. Probably a fight you want exposure to both sides. There's not a huge gap in price or ownership, though, so I can't sit here and say there's a ton of leverage. But heavyweights, it's going to be volatile. UFC would love one of these kids to put on a nice highlight reel here and kind of build up their stock because that division is starving for young talent. We got a matchup here between Con Ofli and Ricardo Ramos. So Ramos, I don't know, one of the more inconsistent fighters in the UFC. I mean, when he looks good, he looks great. When he looks bad, we've seen him quit at times. Last time out against Chepe Mariscal, a lot of people thought Chepe would find the finish there. He did show well to last in a decision. Wasn't very competitive, only landed 37 significant strikes. And that is the biggest knock on Ramos. Not always a high-volume striker, kind of waits for fights to come to him. Tentative, and he makes a lot of dumb mistakes. Like he'll rock a guy and he'll be hurt on the feet. He'll shoot for a takedown for no good reason. Or he'll have a guy in a submission that seems close to finishing and he'll stand up, vice versa. Stupid things like that. But he's taking on a guy in Con Ofli who's undersized for the division. In terms of athleticism, not really on that UFC level. Ramos is going to have a 6-inch reach advantage here. Both these guys are orthodox fighters. So, yeah, it's going to be a question of will Ofli get the leg kicks going? Will Ofli try to wrestle? I think he will, but he's going to have to be very careful. Ramos does have a solid guillotine if he is crashing in. And while I always have issue backing Ramos as a favorite, floating around minus 200 most books, if you look at him right now, I do think he is the side. Again, he hasn't looked great, but it's against a much higher level of opponent than what he's dealing with here. I think the UFC would love to get him back in the win column. And while Ramos is kind of the vet, right? He's been on the roster for a while. Ofli is actually 2 years older. So if they're looking to kind of get Ramos back in the win column, I think it makes sense here in front of his home crowd. Ofli not really someone they're going to be promoting all that heavily. He was in the tough finals against Marion Santos, got completely starched there, so a little bit of a durability question for him as well. I like Ramos. I think he gets it done. Again, it's more of a fade of Ofli than that I'm confident in Ricardo, but sub 30% owned on both sites, a little bit expensive. I do want to have a lot of Ramos in my exposures today, though. I think people are just concerned in backing him because he hasn't looked good, but again, it gets better competition than what he'll be seeing here. Next fight here, and this one comes with a few interesting caveats, right? We got Lucas Almeida taking on Michael Aswell. Aswell floating around minus 200. We saw this line balloon up to, I think, minus 250 at one point, minus 290 right now on Bovada, which is a little bit ridiculous. But Lucas Almeida has a hand injury, and it seems pretty clear. At face-offs, hand is completely swollen. I've had that fracture before. It's called a boxer fracture. It's pretty much just the bones condense, and I'm not a doctor. I might sound like an idiot here, but what happens is it causes your entire hand to swell. It takes a long time to heal. So if Almeida's coming in with an injured hand, and I believe it's his lead hand, that's obviously not going to be favorable for him here. As well, I don't know. I'm not super high on this kid as a prospect by any stretch, but what he does well is push a pace. He does throw a ton of volume. 118 significant strikes in his debut against Balaji Oki. Some people high on Oki. I'm not necessarily. But yeah, a guy who could kind of mix the martial arts. We've seen him shoot takedowns at times on the regional scene. I don't think we'll see that much from him here. But landing 9.1 significant strikes per minute in the UFC is Michael Aswell, that obviously caters well to his DFS scoring. So I like Aswell. I think he probably gets it done. But just keep in mind, there's a chance this fight is called because Almeida does have a hand injury. Maybe the commission doesn't let him go. If he is able to cover it, maybe he's going to underperform. At the same time, I saw Cub Swanson commenting on someone who was talking about this on Twitter, like, hey, I went in there with a broken hand and won fights. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And Almeida, I think if he was 100% healthy, would have been one of my preferred underdogs on this card. So it's tricky, right? Like, we got to take that with a grain of salt. Maybe the hand thing is just overblown. I mean, maybe he ate something he was allergic to. I don't know, something stupid like that. Probably not, though. I think Almeida does legitimately have a hand injury, which is going to cause trouble for him here against a guy in Aswell who doesn't necessarily have KO power, but should be able to press a pace, especially if Almeida is going to be without one of his preferred limbs. So I do like Aswell here to land a ton of volume. He's reasonably priced, but again, I don't think the finish is super likely unless Almeida kind of folds. It's a hand injury. I mean, if he's not using the hand, I don't think he's going to have to call for a doctor stoppage, anything like that. So proceed with some caution. Definitely keep an eye on the line, and if you are risk adverse, maybe just leave this fight out of your exposures because there's a lot of question marks here, right? All right, so we got Carpenter versus Fieldhall. First, let's take a quick look at chat. Nothing going on right now. Again, appreciate you guys tuning in. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Check out the links in the description below. Get access to Occupy as low as $7 per week. You get the slate breakdown from Derek, the Occupy model, which is going to have the OF index for every single fighter on the card, ownership projections for both DraftKings and FanDuel. And for those of you looking to MMA, we also have a lineup builder there as well. Really fun fight here between Clayton Carpenter and Jafel Fieldhole. I don't want to pronounce his first name wrong. Fieldhole broke into the UFC against Mohamed Makayev. Looked great there. Almost broke his leg. And he was finished late in that fight, but since then has gone 2-1. Last time out against Nascimento was pulling ahead, made a few dumb mistakes, ended up on his back in that third round, kind of gave that one away. But Fieldhole, really talented grappler, big frame for the division, not the best striker, but he is explosive, especially out of breaks. Someone I rate pretty highly in terms of their overall skill set. But the same can be said for his opponent here in Clayton Carpenter. Carpenter coming off a pretty ugly loss to Tagir Ulanbekov. Couldn't really get anything going in that one. Prior to that, wins over Roca Ronderos. He's looked good at times. But again, an American traveling down to Brazil. This is Fieldhole's backyard. He's going to have the crowd behind him in a big way. Carpenter, when he's having success, he's out-grappling most of his opponents. But like we saw last time out against Ulanbekov, a little bit of an issue there in doing so. And here he's going to have to be careful as well because Fieldhole, obviously such a dangerous submission grappler. On the feed, if this takes place at striking range, Carpenter is the much higher volume striker, landing more than 3.9 significant strikes per minute compared to Fieldhole's 1.9. But he also takes a lot more damage in exchanges. Fieldhole actually has a positive striking differential, only absorbing 1.6, defending only absorbing 47% of the strikes thrown against him compared to Carpenter, who's absorbing 55%. But this is one of those volatile fights. And again, we have a guy in Fieldhole who I believe, he's still the slight underdog here, priced at $8K. I think you could go either way in this one. It's probably going to play out like a close decision. So maybe you give the nod to the Brazilian fighter with the crowd behind him and all that good stuff. I do think he has the more finishing upside in this fight as well. I want to be more exposed to Fieldhole here, but I'm not confident at all, right? These two similarly owned on both sides, a little bit more ownership going to Fieldhole with the discount. $14 on FanDuel, one of my favorite plays over there. But yeah, I'd be lying if I said I was confident in getting the win. I think Carpenter is super talented. Could present some issues if this fight does stay standing. Seems to have a little bit better of a gas tank as well. I just think Fieldhole could probably win the first two rounds and from there can kind of coast into that decision victory. But again, a fight you probably want exposure to. At the same time, not a fight very likely to finish. A fight that maybe is a lot more likely to finish. Here we have Vitor Petrino taking on Thomas Peterson. Petrino, another Brazilian fighter, going to have the home crowd behind him. Coming off a nice win in heavyweight over Austin Lane, who we already talked about a little bit, not the highest level, but Petrino was struggling to make that 205-pound limit. We saw him run into a guillotine last time he was in Brazil against Anthony Smith, KO'd by Dustin Jacoby. Had a few nice ones prior to that. The win over Bukowski's aged pretty well. But yeah, I mean, this guy is one of these fighters who is great at everything, but not good at mixing it. Not good in terms of his fight IQ, as we saw in the Smith fight. His game planning has been questionable at best, but he is very explosive, usually, especially early in fights. In that same breath, though, we have seen at times him kind of coasting and kind of, again, I've said this already about others, but waiting for the fight to come to him. If he does that here, he could be in trouble because if Thomas Peterson's good at anything, it's grappling. He finds takedowns. He had 9 takedowns against Dontel Mays, 14 minutes and 49 seconds of control time. There was only 11 seconds in that fight where he wasn't controlling where that fight was. So Petrino here is going to have to be careful not to end up on his back. But if he does, he's a much better grappler than Dontel Mays. I think he can work his way back to the feet. But again, heavyweights are always volatile. Peterson, an underdog, probably worth considering a little bit, but I do think Petrino more likely than not just kind of gets it done early. As this fight goes on, if you are someone whose book offers live betting and you're on a heavy Petrino position, maybe look to hedge out of it, or maybe look to take a stab on Peterson after the first round. Because again, I think he has the better cardio and durability in this matchup, and Petrino has just been so volatile to this point in his UFC career that it's tough to get a good read on him. I think the skills there, the athleticism is there. I think he is big enough to stay at heavyweight. I do think he's the better striker in this matchup, better submission grappler, but again, he's not necessarily as good as those parts, not necessarily putting everything together in the same way that Peterson is, who's not a great striker, not really athletic, but he does have the better fight IQ in this matchup, and I'm sure he's going to come in with a solid game plan. So I like Petrino to get it done. Proceed with some caution, though. Quickly checking out the ownership here. We see Petrino floating around 35%. So if you are desperate for some leverage, I don't think Peterson's a bad play. I mean, again, we're kind of starving for good underdogs, good cheap underdogs. I like Figgy. If you don't like Figgy, and I don't blame you at all, Jackson, very live to KO him early. I would probably mix in some Peterson as a means to fit in guys like Joe Alvarez or a Montel Jackson if that's someone you really like. Next fight here we have between Irina Alekseeva and Beatriz Mosquita. Mosquita will be making her UFC debut here. Really talented submission grappler, great jiu-jitsu credentials, going to look to be taking this fight to the mat. Taking on someone like Irina Alekseeva who has, I don't know, been inconsistent. She's outperformed expectations at times. Coming off two ugly losses, though. I mean, the one to Melissa Mullen is just terrible. Did not look good last time out against Segula. Had the win over Egger in her debut that, I mean, in hindsight, kind of fluky. Egger was getting up there in years as well. So, I don't know. I really don't rate Irina. I will say this. These great BJJ players, I mean, Checha was one recently. We had Montague on that Perth card. They come in and they can dominate or they can look terrible. But if she's not getting things to go her way, I mean, there is a chance that Alekseeva could maybe cover that price as an underdog. Low levels women MMA, low level women's MMA for different reasons, kind of similar to heavyweights, always volatile. Never a bad idea to take a couple shots on the dog. But to me, I think Bia is going to be able to take this fight to the mat, drag it there where she should be able to find a submission finish. Again, Irina, not the most athletic, kind of a wiry frame. I don't think that's going to cater to advantage very much here. And Irina also someone who likes to engage in judo, tries to do those kind of head and arm throws, those trips. That's going to play into the strengths of Mosquita. And while Mosquita is the shorter fighter by 4 inches, these two are both listed with a 65-inch reach. So I don't know that gap's going to be too wide on the feet here. And Alekseeva, while she hasn't taken on many great grapplers at the UFC level, just a 65% takedown defense. So in so many words, Mosquita probably under-owned for her submission upside. Actually, no. 32% owned on DK, 44% owned on FanDuel. She is expensive. Don't mind mixing her in as a way to get a little bit different. But as I'm saying this, it's like, no, she's more owned than I expected her to be. So not a fight I have a ton of interest in. Again, with the debutante, you got to kind of proceed with some caution. But I do think the Brazilian gets it done in front of her home crowd. Matt Bardigan here with a good question. Pivot off Lacerda, play Ramos, leave 100 for GPP. Are you saying to pivot? Let me check the pricing here. So Lacerda is 8,900. Yeah, you could leave 100, and especially on these smaller slates where we only have 12 or fewer fights. I do really like the idea of leaving salary on the table as a way to get different. I like Ramos more than Lacerda. I think Oliveira, he missed weight. We'll talk about that fight in a little bit. But going into the week, I thought he was going to be pretty live as an underdog. I like both of these two. But yeah, if you're going to leave 100, I think you're going to get duped a little bit less than using all of your salary here. But there are some kind of interesting caveats to talk about with that Lacerda Oliveira fight when we get to it. But let's keep plugging along here. And again, minus 650 for Bia on the money line, a little bit too wide. Petrino minus 290 to 300, probably a little bit too wide. When we get to the best bets, guys, I'll give you guys some angles to maybe approach those fights that are more favorable. I like to get juice under minus 200 if we're going to talk about best bets. Next fight here, we got Lucas Roca taking on Stuart Nickel. Here's an underdog I like. Nickel, fighting out of Australia, I believe, taking on Lucas Roca, who is going to be the Brazilian fighter in this matchup. The reason I like Nickel is the grappling advantage. He averages 5.6 takedowns per 15 minutes. He lost to Aguilar his last time out. He was looking good there until he was eventually caught in a guillotine. And Aguilar has proven to have one of the better guillotines in the division, if not on the entire roster, in terms of pound for pound ability. Nickel looking great in that fight until he was caught. And I don't know that Roca necessarily has the same submission ability to kind of take the fight there. On the feet, Roca probably the more dangerous and the better striker of the two, but it's not by that wide of a margin. Only landing 2 significant strikes per 15 minutes, showing a 61% takedown defense, having fought Bittencourt on Contender Series and then Clayton Carpenter, who we already discussed on this card. My favorite underdog today, and maybe he gets starched, is going to be Stuart Nickel. I just really think he can get the takedowns going, which caters to a DFS, obviously. Uh, I don't know. I think he could have 5 or 6 here on his way to a decision. If he doesn't find the finish, that's all right with me. But I think he has submission upside. I'm going to pull up Roca on my other screen here and just kind of look at him historically. I don't know. It's always dangerous fading kind of the hometown guys, but I think stylistically the pricing here is just a little bit incorrect. The market has corrected too. I mean, Nickel floating around minus 105 on some books now. Could even flip to the favorite by the time this fight goes off, but pretty much a pick'em, and it's not priced like a pick'em, right? We got the Charles fight where it's 8,200 against 8K, 8,500 to 7,700 here. And looking at ownership, see how popular Nickel is. Yeah, 27% owned on DK, 30 on FanDuel, so middle of the pack. I actually think I want to be over that, if I'm being completely honest. And Roca, I mean, again, he has KO upside. He is the better striker, but I don't know that it's enough for me to make that stand. But again, Roca hasn't really taken on much quality level of competition prior to breaking into the UFC. He had one fight in LFA against the Severino kid. Looked pretty good there, but we've seen KO before, and we saw him submitted his last time out against Carpenter. Again, I think Nickel, the better grappler here, is going to look great early and should be able to maybe even find that submission. So to me, Nickel's someone I have circled that I want to get a lot of exposure to. Price is an underdog. Price too big of an underdog, in my opinion. So yeah, I really like Nickel. Roca, talented kid, definitely the better striker. But again, we're starving for value on this 12 fight card, so we'll take it where we can get it. Next fight here between Julian Pilastri and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Kowalkiewicz, a few years ago, I'd given her a good shot in this matchup. She's getting up there in age, though. She actually turns 40 this week. I think 5 days from this fight, she's going to be 40 years old, coming off 2 decision losses to Lucindo and Gomes, who are decent, but not really anything, I don't know, special, in my opinion. Pilastri hasn't looked that good. I mean, she had a great third round against Godinez, went over Corey McKenna. But the younger fighter seems to be improving. Definitely the better striker in this matchup. And she is strong enough to mostly keep this fight standing, and I think that's going to be the difference here. I will say Kowalkiewicz could maybe try to get her wrestling going. I just don't know that it's something she can do for 15 minutes. Pilastri also does have some sneaky submission ability, even though we haven't really seen it yet in the UFC. But Kowalkiewicz averaging just 0.3 takedowns per 15 minutes. If she averages like 3.3, I'd say she's really live as an underdog. But in a fight that I think mostly takes place in striking range, I expect Pilastri to be landing the bigger strikes. Kowalkiewicz, while she is durable, does not wear damage well. Definitely has some scar tissue in her face. I think we could see her bleeding after a round here. Fight that probably goes to the scorecards. I think Pilastri's overpriced, but if you're desperate to get different, will be very low owned. I'd actually probably rather mix in a little Kowalkiewicz, hope none of the underdogs come in, and she scores well even in a loss against the striker here, because she does put out good volume on the feet. But more than anything, just a fight I don't have a ton of interest in overall. All right, then we have the opener here. This is very interesting. So Oliveira missed weight by 8 pounds. The UFC and the Brazilian Commission said, yes, we'll let the fight go on. His opponent here, Luan Lacerda, accepted the fight, but with a caveat. Oliveira cannot weigh more than 155 pounds when he enters the arena, which I imagine is going to take place any minute now. So if you're not in the Discord, more reason to get behind that paywall and get in there. But keep an eye on Twitter. Keep an eye on the UFC beat reporters, all that good stuff, because there is a chance this fight is called off. We should know before lock, which is a good thing with this fight being the opener. But it is significant because usually fighters who cut a lot of weight put on a lot of weight before fight day. Oliveira probably someone who would weigh more than 155 pounds if he did make weight. But now he has that cap. So it's going to be trickier for him to really rehydrate the way he wants to. But he's just looked terrible at the UFC level, coming off 3 losses. Gravely, Marcos Martinez, all decent opponents, but nothing about his game has really impressed me all that much. But he's taking on a guy in Lacerda who's also been on a losing streak, but against really tough grapplers in Cody Stamen, good wrestler, and Damone Blackshear, who obviously found the KO. But I think Lacerda was a little bit worried about the takedown threat there, which kind of led to that loss. So looking at statistics, Lacerda lands 2 more significant strikes compared to Oliveira per minute. He absorbs a lot of damage in exchanges, but again, he's been taking on a quality level of competition. 75% takedown defense, averages 1.26 takedowns per 15 minutes. And Oliveira has just a 38% takedown defense in the UFC. This line has gotten a little bit out of hand, looking at minus 300, so there might be some value on the Oliveira money line. But personally, if this fight is on, he can't really rehydrate. I would much rather go to Lacerda than I would Oliveira. I know he's expensive here, but I'm thinking the price will keep his ownership down. Hopefully these concerns about rehydration and maybe this fight being called off keep ownership down as well. But Lacerda, to me, really solid DFS play. I do think he gets it done probably inside the distance. Again, 2 fighters who have yet to fight a win in the UFC. I think Lacerda is the better of the 2. All right, so we have gone through the fight by fight. Any questions you guys have, whether they be about DFS builds, betting, just a fight stylistically? Do you think X, Y, or Z could happen? Happy to answer anything, guys, for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. Going to go ahead and do a dummy build on both sites. Yeah, then we'll get to the best bets and a few long shot plays as well. So really appreciate you guys being here. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. Check out the links to get behind the paywall. Let's start here with some dummy builds, right? And again, I think we want the main event in almost every build. So let's kind of hedge our exposures here. I want to go with Gamrot on DK because we get the control time, right? Again, I think Oliveira gets it done. He is one of my favorite guys priced under 8K, but I think just we have to respect the model. It's become a meme a little bit. Hashtag trust the model, regardless of which fantasy sport you're playing. There's always upside for these guys, but to see him rating as the best OF in X play is major. Like, we can't ignore that. And he's cheap too at 8,400 or 17 on FanDuel. So let's go ahead. We'll go with Gamrot over on DK. Hedge our bets a little bit. Go with Oliveira. Not in the captain spot, but we'll put him in here over on FanDuel at just 16. Again, I really like field hole here. Price is an underdog. I mean, not a fight I'm super confident in, but if we're scraping for value, I think he makes a lot of sense. I mentioned Nickel as one of my favorite plays in terms of his upside as an underdog as well. I also like that he's a grappler. So from there, we got to kind of have to pick and choose who we want to pay up for. It's a little bit tricky. I do like Aswell's volume against Almeida with a broken hand, but I could see that fight going the distance. Pinto or Denise, I think you could kind of take your pick there. I mean, Denise for value at 7,900, I do like. I'm not going to say I'm super confident in him, but it does allow us to kind of pay up a little bit more than we would if we were to go with Pinto. Maybe we go with Pinto on the FanDuel lineup. But yeah, I had Figgy I mentioned earlier. Let's go Figgy on one side again. This is me on an island. I just think the gap in experience is wide. I think Figueiredo, while he looks terrible sometimes, is also capable of showing up and looking tremendous. He looked good at weigh-ins. He's saying all the right things. I don't think he's going to have any issues with the knee. So yeah, I'll throw Figgy in one here. I like Alvarez a lot. And then we could go ahead and get someone like Petrino as well. So we're not going to go with Figueiredo on FanDuel. Maybe since we're going with Petrino there, we use Peterson as the underdog, right? Because again, if Peterson were to get it done, he's going to have to weather that early storm and then get some takedowns going. So I do like him as a value piece. On FanDuel, we're talking about MVP where you're paying up. I do think Alvarez is probably the safest from this group. So maybe we just go with him. Go with the easy route on that one. We pulled the knees on the other side. Maybe we go with him over here. I really like Ramos. I think he has upside that we can land. I don't know. I wanted to get to Lacerda. Actually, no. Pull the knees. Pinto's cheaper here. And then that way we could get to Lacerda. Something like this I think is really strong. Again, this lineup's going to be duped. No salary left on the table. Probably the chalkiest captain. So you probably want to mix things up. Good way to get different would be to just play someone other than Alvarez and captain, maybe a Ramos, Lacerda, if you think they have finishing upside. But a tricky card, not only because there's a lot of close matchups on the money line, but a lot of these Brazilian fighters are very volatile, as talented as they are. We have two uh, women's fights that are relatively low level. Those are volatile. Two heavyweight fights that are relatively low level. Those are volatile. So definitely proceed with caution. Be sure to monitor your bankroll on this one. But let's go ahead and get into the best bets as well. Last week, 2-3, not great. We trudge ahead, right? 23-23. I like Lacerda by KO or submission here, taking on Oliveira, who missed weight. He's not going to be able to rehydrate. I think Lacerda has submission upside. I think he has KO upside here. I think it's more likely to come via KO. But at minus 150, you're getting a much better price than paying minus 300 for him. And if that fight gets canceled, it gets canceled. It's the first fight of the night. We can just call it, I don't know, a push. I like Nickel to get the win on the money line, but if you want to play it safe, you can play his plus 3.5. If that fight does go to the scorecards, just needs to win one round, right? 29-28, 29-28, 29-28. Even in a loss, you're winning minus 155 on him there on DK. Mosquito against Alexieva. I initially had Mosquito by submission, minus 160, but I thought about it, and there is a chance she puts up her gun in her debut, and if she does, Alexieva probably finds some gross finish on the feet. So just play the under 2.5 to make that a little bit safer. Obviously, you have to pay a little bit juice into there. DK does have these kind of parlays that are built into one fight at a time. Alvarez in the under 1.5. I think he steamrolls Luke in all likelihood. Maybe takes a little bit of time to get going, but having the first half of that second round makes that more appealing. And this fight's tough. I mean, Gamrot by decision might be his most likely outcome. Personally, I think Oliveira probably finishes Gamrot in the third or fourth round, but if he doesn't, maybe Gamrot catches him on the feet. So this one could go either way. I'm not going to be surprised if it goes to decision, but 5-round fight between a guy on short notice who faded in a big way against Dan Hooker, Oliveira, who did go 5 rounds with Charles, just said he wanted to go 5 rounds for once. This time he doesn't want to. Probably going to be way more aggressive here in front of his home crowd. I like the under 4.5 rather than playing a side in that one. A few long shots. We did hit one long shot last week, but if we're not going to talk about the wins losses, why even get into that? But Pilastre by KO or sub. I just think that this could be the retirement fight for KK. If it is, maybe she just folds, gets out of there. Petrino by submission. I think the KO is more likely, but to see the plus 550 on a guy who came into the UFC as a grappler, I mean, Peterson's going to be engaging in the grappling, looking for takedowns. I could see him running his head into a guillotine or something like that. Or maybe he gets swept, ends up in a head and arm. There's a lot of ways for this to happen. I just think the plus 550 is wrong. Denise by decision. I think this fight could go either way. I think there's a good chance it goes the distance. So you can play Pinto if you prefer, but plus 330 on a guy who's now a slight favorite here to go the distance. And we saw him go the distance as recent as his last fight. I think it makes a lot of sense. And then Figgy, again, I'm probably alone on this one. Definitely proceed with some caution. Does he get knocked out by Montel almost instantly? Probably. But if he doesn't and this fight gets extended, I think he has a lot of outs. I think he could keep things close, maybe get the Brazilian not on the scorecards. He has submission upside. He's very powerful on the feet at this weight class as well. So if he gets his grappling going, I definitely think he justifies his money line price and then some. But a stab I'm willing to take. Very, very risky one, though. So definitely keep that in mind. Matt Martin say nickel might be chalk. Yeah, I thought so too. Again, I'm looking at the model right now, though. 27% on DK, 30 on FanDuel. That's middle of the pack on both sites. So yeah, he probably could steam a little bit, coming more popular than that, but definitely someone I'll have a lot of exposure to. But yeah, guys, any other last minute questions, feel free to get them in. You could also at me on Twitter, at NickMarronDFS. You see my name underneath my head here. Go ahead, follow me there. Always happy to answer questions. We got NBA right around the corner. Guys are working hard on NBA preseason. We got football going right now, obviously, NFL. Really, really good content every week. So check those links. Get behind the paywall. And we're going to keep grinding the UFC. So really, really hope we have a great card tonight. In Brazil, the crowd should be rabid. Always is. Throwing crap at the guys who are from Brazil. Maybe not the classiest crowd, but certainly one of the more fun crowds to watch on TV as far as getting behind fighters. They should fill the arena quickly. And really, really fun fights. I mean, top to bottom. We got a lot of former champs here. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a fun one. Good luck, everyone. Take care. Let's have a great night. Make some money.